Debbie, why don't you introduce yourself for the group?
Of course, I'm Debbie Raymond, and that used to be Debbie Raymond Panette, but now I'm only Debbie Raymond. And we have to say it from the beginning because everyone knows me as the Panette. So
Sure.
now we're, making it known that there's no more of that.
Yeah.
Today we have such an exciting show. We have Mike and Chuck, known as a friend name, right? Chuck,
Yep.
not Charles.
Yeah.
And Bob, of course, yourself, where we want to explain a little bit of the unknown when it comes to UFOs and things that people have seen and not seen.
Right.
So we're very excited about that.
Hi, I'm Bob McDermott. I'm very excited to be here in the Paranormal and Beyond. It's a great show. It gives a
Yeah.
voice to the paranormal community. And one of the things we want our listeners to understand is that paranormal really transcends a lot. It transcends USO,
Yes.
UFOs. It transcends Bigfoot. It transcends witches. So throughout this series, that's what we intend to do, is to have different disciplines on this show that can tell their story. So we're delighted to have Seacoast Saucers here with us today. One of the questions that Debbie and I like to start off with is how you guys got involved in this. I think it's always interesting to see how it started. So maybe, Chuck, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you very much for having us on the show, both of you. It's a pleasure to meet you both. And hopefully your first show and every show goes off really
Yeah,
great.
you're on the...
Thank you.
So yeah, you would ask the question just a little bit about how we got started. So essentially, we both have totally different stories. But for me, at least, getting into ufology, the study of UFOs, and really not just researching, but reading voraciously about everything I could, started when I was about 11.
Wow.
So picture this. I grew up in Rochester, New Hampshire. My father was into some politics. He was the longest sitting city councilman in Rochester's history. He was involved in House of Representatives. He knew Sununu a little bit, and certain other people and figures here in New Hampshire. And I asked him one day when I was about 11, I said, Dad, do you believe in UFOs? And he just kind of smirked and smiled and said, well, yeah, I saw one once. And I thought he was full of poop, to be quite honest with you. So I asked him, well, what did you see? And he goes, and he told me the story, which he told me many times in the next 3 years, and he passed away, unfortunately, when I was 14. But for those 3 years, he would go on to tell me the same story.
How old was your dad? Excuse me. How old was your dad when he had this encounter?
So as the story goes, approximately about a year before I was born, so we're looking at 1976, he used to work for a construction company located out of Northampton. So what he would do is he would come home many late nights. In this case, he decided to take a scenic route, which was the possibly 107 to Rochester. So he just went from Northampton south instead of taking the direct route. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. We think it was roughly the fall of '76. And what he said was he looked up to his right, and just like the moon essentially follows you when you're driving, it's typically in that location. What he said was he saw a very large craft. He estimated it was about 80 yards long. And he estimated that this thing had 3 windows, and in each window he saw a non-human entity, or what you might call an ET. He said they had black eyes. And the one in the center window had what he considered to be a clipboard. And they were just literally watching him from me to you. And I said, Dad, were you scared? And he said, oh, no, I wasn't scared. And so my parents were divorced at the time. I went to my mother's that weekend, and I said, Mom, do you think Dad's ever seen a UFO? Oh, no, he's full of baloney. Went to walk away, and she goes, but there was the time before you were born that essentially he had come home, and he was looking out every single shade. He was scared.
Wow.
He didn't know what happened. He told me about these beings that were watching through these windows. So what I found was, at an early age, I was kind of a little bit of an investigator myself. I was starting to interview the people in my life that were closest to me to see if my dad was being honest. And he shared a number of things with me about that. But he would start to take me to things. I went to the 25th anniversary of the Exeter incident, and he started to encourage my knowledge of it. He passed away in 1991, and they named the Vocational Center in Rochester after him.
Wow.
He was Citizen of the Year. But for me, the struggle was, and I have family members that still will not talk about this and don't want to acknowledge it. For me, the struggle was, here is somebody that had a life-changing event that was so monumental that he could not even tell the people closest to him, other than myself, my mother, and maybe my oldest brother. In fact, some of my siblings think that it's all a bunch of baloney still.
Really?
to me, the conditioning and all of that was involved in it was so strong that I wanted to try to get to the root of why is it that people have these experiences, they don't talk about it. This is something very serious.
So let me ask you, Chuck, this was back, you said 1976?
We believe it was probably right around the fall of 76.
So before we get to you, Mike, do you see now that that has changed at all? Is the communications, when there's an encounter or an abduction, more open than it was before?
So if it's a really interesting question what you're asking. So when you say before, let's go back to the late 40s, all right? So Kenneth Arnold in June of 47 coined the phrase flying saucer because he was flying on a search and rescue mission for a downed plane in the mountains over Washington. And what he saw was about 9 discs that were skipping like saucers skipping on the water. Wow. So that's how we get the term flying saucer, okay? If we are to start around post-47 and start looking at the late 40s and early 50s, which I think is a very crucial time if you really want to look at it. What you would see is you would see in the newspapers all across this country people reporting UFOs, people seeing lights in the sky, people not being scared to talk about it. They were in every major newspaper. People were having experiences. You were actually seeing a rise of people that were having experiences on more of a spiritual level. Automatic writing involved with people that were saying that they had they were in contact with some sort of a ship and these people that wanted to talk to us about how to save the planet. So this was almost more of a open issue. And what we find is roughly 1953, 54, we see a huge decline that starts to slowly over time work its way. And I'm actually developing a lecture and doing a lot of research right now into why that is, and there's a few things I can talk about if we choose to later. But essentially what you see is you see a steady decline in people having those conversations, much like ghost hunting.
Right, sure.
We see that people and the stigma attached to it and the social conditioning
That's correct.
has been to such a degree that people do not have public conversations.
So
and that's why we do what we do.
Let me ask you, did the government have anything to do with, in the 50s, with quieting that down and stopping that communication? I mean, when you talk to UFO folks at every level, I know you guys tend to be more support groups and less investigators, but when I talk to UFO folks, they talk a lot about how the government has stifled communications about UFOs, about encounters and stuff. Do you think that's what turned that in the 56, 7 range, that people started becoming afraid of, the men in the black suits?
Yeah, so let's go back in time. A lot of people don't realize in 1952, I think in June, over 2 nights. Well, let me pause the story for a second. What does everybody say? If there were UFOs, where would they land?
Right.
Where would they land? Everybody says the White House, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Washington.
So a lot of people don't realize that in July of 52, excuse me, thank you, Mike, there was multiple nights in which lights were seen over Washington, D.C. They were seen by multiple people. In fact, they were on radar on Reagan. So it was on the cover of Time Life. You can look it up. Anybody can go to the internet and actually look up the Time Life magazine article. We went from something like that to then, in January of 53, the Robertson panel, which was essentially, and anybody can look this up, this Freedom of Information, you can look up any of this stuff, but essentially the Robertson panel was a panel that was put together by the CIA, and it basically said, what do we do about this? Are UFOs a national security risk? And in that panel, what they decided was they had J. Allen Hynek, who did Project Blue Book for years. Walt Disney was a part of this conversation, believe it or not.
I do recall something like that, Walt Disney being a part of
Walt
that.
Disney.
And that gets to how the media actually spread, me as well, how the media spread what we might consider as disinformation over a very sensitive topic. But during the Robertson panel, what was the outcomes of that, at least what was reported, was that less than 10% can actually not be understood, meaning that there is something that they don't understand what's going on, but the other 90% is explained as natural phenomena. And the other thing they said was the reason that we have to put aside and we have to stop people from talking about this is because it could be used by the Soviets during this Cold War that is now beginning. And it could be used to clog up all of our resources, the phone lines, and we can't be having that because that could be a way for the Ruskies at the time to essentially cause a lot of major issues with what is now developing. So they actually use that as the main rationale for why it is we do not have these conversations today. And they said we have to start a campaign in order to stop these everyday conversations. And part of the lecture I'm developing is really looking at what are all those mechanisms that have helped society get to a point where we no longer need anybody from the news media to tell us not to talk about it, but we police each other now.
Right.
So this is very interesting, to go back a little bit to when you were discussing the story about your dad. If that's very personal to you, right? And you say this is kind of where you've begun to do your own investigation.
Sure.
So to me, from what you told us, he had an actual experience. That is the truth be told. And you also said that some people in your family might not still acknowledge that this even happened. So how does that make you feel? That I don't think he was dishonest at all. I think he really had that experience. So where does that leave you? It's kind of in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have one particular brother, and I'm very close to all my family. We're a very close family. I have one brother in particular. When I went on an excursion to go literally hunt UFOs in the state of Washington, and I came back, and I showed him actual video evidence. I said,
Yeah.
"Look at this. This can't be explained. Like this is the craziest thing."
Right.
And he goes, "Wow, that's weird." And he goes on and gets work done. And
Which is so like that would happen
Oh, yeah.
too when we go ghost
Exactly.
hunting. Same thing. Yes.
so I think what happens, and we've talked about this, it's cognitive dissonance, meaning when we have a set belief system, anything that doesn't fit into that rigid set belief system, we dismiss, we turn it away,
Yes.
because our reality has to fit within that understanding. It isn't until that we understand, or at least start to perceive, being either open-minded
Right.
or start to understand that we really don't have control over what reality is. Reality is a much bigger issue.
Right.
We have to start opening up to the bigger discussions, which is, what is really going on in the skies? Is it even alien all the time? Which I
Right.
don't believe it is. I think Mike and I would be the first to admit that we're open to anything.
Right.
Yeah. And I like to hear too, like about his personal, because you said you're very different. So I'd love to hear what
So Mike, tell
how
us
you got started.
tell us how you got in.
I've been interested in this almost as long as it's been interested in me. I had an encounter very early on in childhood. I was about 3.
Wow.
There's some indication it might have happened prior to that, but that's my first memory of it.
3 years of age.
Yeah, 3 or 4. It's
Yeah.
You can't pinpoint it looking back, at that
Yes.
young, but it ended up being more of an abduction type scenario. I used to stick to the label abductee, and then I've also had some really positive experiences with them too. So I kind of just float with the experiencer label now.
Well,
but
you know what? That's like haunting. Right,
And
Deb?
yes.
You know, when we talk about ghost hunting, we'll say the house is haunted. And I say, well, I'm not sure because 90% of it's angelic. So I think you run into the same thing. Abduction has the connotation, oh my God, I'm going to have needles stuck in me, I'm going to be probed, everything else. When in fact it could be positive.
Right, it's just our perception. We don't know their motives, their history.
That's
their-
right.
So
That's right.
it's hard to pinpoint as negative or positive,
Right.
but yeah. So that's how I got into all this, and I grew up kind of like Chuck's dad with nobody to talk to this about. And when you did, everybody thought you were crazy, so you learned
Right.
to just shut up for a while.
Right.
So let me ask you, do you mind elaborating a little bit on what happened to you?
Sure. There was some type of family function, like a birthday party or something.
Right.
All my extended relatives, aunts and uncles, cousins, and all that were at my grandmother's house in Southampton. And there was this calling to get outside. There was a dining room with a sun porch off of it that overlooked the backyard. That was the focus point or for whatever. And there was just this real urge to get outside, and it wasn't in 10 minutes. It was now you need to get outside. Ended outside in the driveway with my cousin. She's 6 months older than me, and we were watched as children. We didn't just run free.
Right, right.
We wouldn't have. That wasn't typical. And from the backyard, it looked like the woods were on fire. They just started glowing red, and this craft rose out from behind the tree line and made its way up to the end of the driveway.
Wow.
There was a big tree at the end of the driveway, and it kind of parked right above it, just off to the side of it for a while. Had a series of strobing lights around the outside. Then all of a sudden, the the strobe pattern changed, and almost like when you open a car door, there was like an interior light in the craft that came on. Then there was a blank spot, and that was all I remembered. And the next thing you know, you saw the thing shoot up to the other end of the driveway, stop above a telephone pole, and then shoot off into a blink. And then I went back probably 6 or 7 years ago now, and we were doing as part of another project some past life regressions, and everybody's like, stop there, you know you want to. And there was some more details. I won't get into them all right now, but I ended up snapping myself out of the regression because it was a lot to take on.
Right. What ends up happening is, from what I learned as a medium, is our subconscious is like a file cabinet, and I try to explain that to everybody when I teach my classes and stuff. And in those files are information that we kind of log in our memory bank. And sometimes we choose to lock the cabinet, and sometimes we choose to open it. So, which is why, like, you can get back there during past life regression when someone like myself, my cabinet's always open. So those memories go way back to me since I was 2. Do you know what I mean? So, but that's where it may be difficult for you as time goes on, because if they want you to open up that file cabinet and for you to remember it again, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So, do you know what I'm saying?
That's definitely
and
been
it's
the
like
case.
we
And
have
the more
no
we've
control.
dwelled into
That's
it, the more it
correct.
just floods
See, look
in.
at my hair's growing, and there's nothing we can do about
Yeah.
it. So, you know,
right.
and the best thing I can tell you is just be positive about it, and you know, preparation, and just be like a sponge and take it all in. You know,
Right.
yeah.
So we kind of got to the point where, you know, I knew all the shows, knew all the
Yeah.
literature. So I got hooked up with a group through ghost hunting, actually. I found locally on Meetup, and he thought I was nuts. I came in the door and was like, oh, I've got a petition for you to sign. I tried to get the marker for Betty and Barney Hill, and, and it did go through with a lot of help from their niece, but he thought I was nuts at first. And
Sure.
Yeah.
but so through that, I was able to start a group just to have open discussions. It wasn't quite what it was now, but that's how Chuck found us. And
My next question was, how did they
Right.
meet up? Because it's 2 very different scenarios. So how did you guys come
It was
about?
interesting. I moved back from Maine. I had been working as a licensed social worker and a private investigator in Maine for a number of years. And I moved back to Rochester, my hometown, and I started to look up, well, where can I have these conversations? I really want to get into this field more. And that led me to meetup.com, which I then went to Social Saucers Gathering, which was one of the first ones Mike ever put on at what's the KRI Center today. And I went there, I met Mike, and the funny part is, through the years, we've said, boy, you've always looked familiar to me, and we grew up one town away from each other. And we had crossed paths many times, but just never really put a face to a name. So essentially, we met through that, and now we both co-host 3 meetup groups every single month at the KRI Center through through Seacoast Saucers of New England.
How many encounters do you think happens in New Hampshire a year, on an average?
it's really hard to say, especially in New Hampshire. For whatever reason, this area is very tight-lipped. It's not that it doesn't happen as much as it does
It
in other
definitely
places.
does
People just do
happen,
not say it.
Right.
Yeah, it does happen because I've had 3 instances, you know, myself, where there was always kids and witnesses in my vehicle with me when I've seen it, and it's always been on 101. So, you know what I mean? And when traffic completely stops at 9 o'clock at night because everyone saw the same thing, there's no way we all drove away saying, what was that? Because all those cars stopped.
You bring
know
up
what I mean?
you bring up 101, and
yeah.
I just, if I could take a
Of
second
course.
to elaborate a little
Yeah.
bit. My dad's experience was close to 101.
I know. That when you said 107, that's in my
Yep.
yeah, 107. I was like, I know exactly where he's talking
Dean
about.
Merchant, who actually started the XR UFO Festival, is a very close friend of ours. And Dean took to my story very quickly. And Dean came to us probably, I want to say about 5 months ago, and we all met, and Dean looks at me and goes, Chuck, now, I have been interviewing people for years, and I've got at least 6 other cases of people that were around 107, 101, this whole area, in which they all described the craft with 3 windows,
Yes.
and some of which with these beings.
Wow.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were in the 70s.
Wow.
So and Dean is an amazing advocate for a number of things, from nuclear power to UFOs
Right.
to everything in the area.
Wow.
I mean, he's well known for a lot of the articles he writes. He's just an amazing investigator, and we're lucky to have him as a friend. So right there, your area, and
Yes.
in fact, he would make the argument if he was here, and if he's going to watch this, he will laugh because he's had this conversation many times. This, where we are currently in Raymond,
Yeah.
it's almost like Pawtuckaway State Park here in
Right,
Raymond.
right.
If you were to draw a radius around that, Mike's, mind me just saying this, Mike's experience, we're not far from here.
Wow.
We have we have other people that are involved in our organization, and many of them, if you draw that radius, now Exeter is only about, 5 towns away?
Right.
Maybe?
Yeah.
So when we look at that radius
Right.
around the park, we also have America's Stonehenge not too far from
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
These are sites
Yeah.
that I think, and there's a lot of hypotheses as to what it could be exactly.
Right,
I tend to
right.
follow, we see a lot of it having to do with moving waterways at times. It could have to do, sometimes people believe in something called ley lines, which could have something to do with that. Energetic patterns that flow, maybe they can see these
I
things.
do believe in that as well. I do.
Really?
However, but when you see this move so quickly and just literally stop and then moves again really quick and stops and has a little bit of flame and yeah, please. There's no, you know what I mean? Like it's not an asteroid, it's not a meteor. No way, because I've seen those before.
Right.
And like I said, when you can stop traffic, which it has done a couple of times, everyone saw it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah,
Makes me
it's
wonder.
unbelievable.
The highway department put up a whole bunch of cameras all over Route 16
Yes.
about 4 years ago.
Really?
I wish they do it at 101. Maybe they do, because they would get some
So
interesting
true.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think they put that up for that reason?
I don't, but
It would be a great byproduct of those games.
it could be a very.
It really could be.
Yeah.
And today, that's another thing I was going to mention to you as well. Because in the work that you do, and you go in and have your own investigations, do you have your own equipment and so on? When we catch that footage, like you said, you show it to your brother. And the same thing when it comes to any kind of ghost hunting, it seems like even that is not enough proof until someone has their own experience.
Right.
And to me, doing what I do for work, when someone has their own experience, that's kind of when they start coming in.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in your field. It's when they have experience. So when you do your meetups, are you finding that more people are interested in it, or are they coming because they've had experiences? Or both. Do you know what I'm
You want to
saying?
take this one? You want me to?
Yeah.
Because
It's
there's some
both,
good
but
stories.
we had the way the meetings are set up. We tried to cover a little bit of everything. We have one group that is just open for anybody who is interested, but obviously people who have had encounters and
Right.
experiences are welcome to it too. So sometimes that turns semi into a support group depending on who's there.
Oh, okay.
But then we have a separate group specifically for people who have had encounters or abductions.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And then
Is it an open forum, like meaning like so everyone can speak or talk
Yes,
and
yes.
things like that? Oh,
Yep.
great. Okay.
And then you want to
Yeah,
try
so-
to take the third one?
So the last one, he always gives me the roughest one. So anybody that's heard of Dr. Stephen Greer or has even, Netflix can watch a documentary called Sirius, which essentially Dr. Stephen Greer headed the Disclosure Project and another other projects, in which are really trying to get at the root of this phenomenon that we're so interested in. One of the things they do is something called the CE5 initiative. And what that is just kind of a set standard for how they hold their space, do a meditation, and they try to make consciousness contact with off-worlders.
Right.
And what we try to do is our own version of that, and we'll do that once a month where anybody's invited to come in. We do a meditation around actually the frequency of the sun. And it has its own frequency, which we kind of play, which is a meditative sort of a sound, and we do that with the intent of trying to make contact. And we've had some really interesting things happen for that.
So I find this very interesting because, again, from the field I'm in and what you two are discussing, do you have any protection mechanisms or safety concerns when you are doing something like that?
Yes.
Because you can call in any kind of energy.
That's right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah,
are
the
you...
third member of our team who couldn't be here today is also a
Yeah.
medium. And
Okay, yes.
we work out of a protected space, and
Perfect.
it's only allowed
Yeah.
that benevolent
Okay,
thing.
so-
Excellent.
So,
Oh,
now
good,
I'm
good,
interested
good.
in this. So you work with a medium,
Yes.
and does the medium make contact?
Well, let's define what contact is
Yeah.
first, right?
Yeah.
So contact can come in a number of different ways. I think we're so used to contact being, oh, well, something's going to appear right in front of you in physical form, and that's contact. Anything else is
Yeah.
not contact. So what we do is we will go into a meditation. We go in with a positive intention. Intent is everything with a lot of the stuff that
Right.
we do. So we will go in with positive intentions. We'll sit there. We'll say to everybody that comes. In fact, the last time that we did it, and every time we'll ask everybody to journal without speaking, and that's very important because we want people to go into their meditation with no preconceived
Right.
notions, and then we ask them all if journal whatever it was that came to you in your meditation, and then if you feel comfortable, share it. And what we find is commonalities are through the roof.
Really?
People that didn't have these conversations, seeing the same thing, seeing the same symbols. We had a lady that came up with a name. We Googled the name, and it was the name of some off-world being that people talk about all the time. She claimed never to have heard of. I have personally shared, experiences that I had, the person next to me going, and this has happened many times, where they will be identical.
Right.
And you sit there, and
Yeah.
at some point you start to say, well, what is going on? And we do feel a lot of what's going on with UFOs and alien encounters today has to do more with consciousness and what we see
Yes,
as
it
reality.
does. Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, people are going to see this, and the first thing to think is it's all about alien abductions, and it's all about seeing.
Right.
It's more spiritual than that.
That's what we knew.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
why you were the first ones that we booked for
Well,
the
Yeah.
show.
People see us
Do
and
you know
they
what I'm
think
saying?
aliens
Yeah.
and out of space, and we don't. Yeah, it's part of what we do, but we really work on the human level, how
Right.
it affects people.
That's
and-
right.
Right.
That's right.
And,
Yes.
and what is the message that they're trying to send? I mean, when I talk to people, they'll say to me that I've heard this many times in lectures I've done, that we're an experiment. That's what we're here, and they're kind of monitoring that experience, and that's why they come visit every so often to see how their experiment's going.
You look like you were going to say something.
It's just interesting because when you say like, what do they want? One thing that they've experienced through meditation and what I do through work is it's just proof that we're all sharing the same space. That's what it is. So by people having and seeing the same thing and writing it down, journaling without saying out loud, and you having the same experiences, it's just showing
Yeah.
we are in the same energetic space as any alien or any other being that there is. We're all sharing the same space.
But when we have these encounters, is there a message? I mean, is there a standard message coming out? Or is it so spiritual, it's like a religion that has an overall message, but everybody has a different message to take away from it? You follow what I'm saying?
That's
Yeah,
exactly
I
what it
think
is.
the-
That's
yeah,
what
the
it
back
is, what
half
you
of
just
that.
said. So, and because everyone that goes to their groups may be leaving with a whole different message or insight,
Right.
so to speak. But I also agree that you have to be open to it, because I don't think you can just go to one of these things and be totally cynical and not be open to it. And it's like we sometimes, and it has to do with energy too. Like even just us before, people don't know this, but we even changed our seats before we started because energy-wise, I sat down, I'm like, oh, no, we're supposed to move. So I moved, you know what I mean? Just so the energy can be free-flowing and everyone can kind of be settled. But that has to do even what you do for work. And the support that you give everybody is very important because individually, they're not going to have the same scenarios and what they see and what they believe in.
Well, and
So you
for-
really have to be open to that.
And for years, I mean, it's probably still out there. Everybody's probably seen it's like 52 signs you might be in an abductee.
That's right,
And
right.
there's a lot of good things that say, all right, if you check them off and you tally up your score, yeah, maybe you are. But it also is a double-edged sword because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not on that list that is
That's
very
right.
common, and people's stories got brushed aside. Nobody wanted to hear it because it didn't
That's
match
right.
up with the standard.
This is important what Mike just said. Why do you think some people who are having experiences are not discussing it? Do you think it's the way they were raised or they were afraid of what people are going to think? Do you think it's a series of, different things or?
So we have, and I won't use any names, but we have a gentleman who in 1965 was in his teens, and he lived in Exeter. So for those that aren't aware, in 1965, September 3rd, in 1965 in Exeter, there was a large mass sighting in which multiple police officers saw it. It's called the Incident at Exeter. It's one of the most
Oh,
well-documented.
okay.
And that's what led to the Exeter UFO Festival that we actually helped put together. And about a week after it had been in the paper and all of this happened. This one gentleman who's in his 70s now and comes to our group said that essentially he had heard some planes, and he had read that these UFOs had been in the area, so he went out to go see what was going on with the planes. And what he saw was, when he caught up with it, he saw an orange ball of light type of ship that was going southbound over 101, and he saw it chased by aircraft.
Yeah.
And this was what was described just a week prior, and is even part of the book, The Incident at Exeter.
Right.
And what he said was, he didn't talk to anybody about this almost his whole life.
Wow.
And he looked at us, he almost had a tear in his eye. I mean, he was sharing very personal information. And what he said was, he felt as though it went against his religious beliefs. He felt as though it contradicted his understanding of the world, and he didn't want people to think he was crazy until, and the same reason that he didn't really talk about it, he said he talked to his priest. And he explained to his priest, is this against God's will? What is it? And he said, actually, no. God created many things, not just man. In fact, that encounter shifted him enough to look up our group. In fact, he has said, this group is the best thing to ever happen to me because I can
That
talk
is
to somebody for
awesome.
the first time.
Right.
And that's one of many stories. We've got another person that feels very kinship to the ocean and a number of things, and considers herself what some people call Pleiadian, which is a very healing, natural, beautiful energy. And we have multiple people that, some people remember what they consider past lives.
Right.
And not even in this earth. So we have people coming from all over with different stories that, a lot of the viewers are going to think are absolutely crazy. But again, it's because people have not had these experiences. They have not talked to somebody,
Right.
have not had to live these things.
So we may get the cynical ones who are thinking this is a bunch of hogwash, but then we're also going to get the ones that say,
Oh, sure.
I am so excited. You know what I mean? Like, we're so happy that this conversation happened. We're so happy
Right. Well,
that we
you know,
had you on the show.
The other thing that's happening, Deb, is because I'm just amazed when they said they work with a
Oh,
medium.
yeah.
Because
yeah.
ghost groups didn't work with mediums, and
Yeah.
we were probably the first two to ever hook up in the world of paranormal that we
It's
had a
true.
medium with us. I
It's
mean, it was
true.
kind of unheard of. But it seems to me now that disciplines are starting to, we've been talking about this for years, haven't we?
Yes.
Starting to cross over with each other, because I've always felt that this is all tied into something. You mentioned spiritual, and you've mentioned it a couple of times. And it's interesting to me because you go back to this gentleman you just told us about, way back then, he had a spiritual connection, right? He felt that spiritual connection. When back in the 50s, I think very few people looked at UFOs and spiritual in the same breath. Did you agree with that?
They actually, I think in the 50s it was almost characterized as cartoonish and
Yeah,
not
it
something
was.
that they took seriously. You
Or
know
a
what I'm
threat.
saying?
Or a big
And-
threat.
Or a threat, right.
In
You know?
1962, my great uncle was kicked out of Brewster Academy in Wolfboro for claiming he was abducted by aliens.
He was
Really?
put out of the academy.
Yep, the school claimed it was either
Wow.
a mental issue or
Right.
drugs. Either way, they weren't equipped to deal with it.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
And that just shows how
What a
things
story.
have changed decade after decade.
Yeah.
Because even though we do live in an eclectic world,
Yeah.
I think it is becoming more acceptable, but we still will always have the ones that think that.
If I could go back to what Mike just said,
Yeah.
because there's a whole other layer to what he's talking about, too. He touched on something just at surface level. The other level to what he just said was, I'm not the only one in my family that's had these experiences.
Right.
I'm just
That's
the first
right.
to talk about it.
That's right.
And another part of this whole scenario that people need to understand away from the pop culture is there are many people who, who claim to be either abductees or contactees, that when you look at their family tree, their children have experiences, their children's children, and even their
I was
parents.
going to ask you that.
And what's really interesting is Mike did not know a lot of this stuff until later, until his experience started to come to fruition.
Actually, even within the family, a lot of it was kept quiet. When the marker went up and that news of my involvement with that went around the family, that's when all the stories started coming out of the woodwork. Like my parents pulled over on Route 1 in Hampton in '77 along with like 5 other cars to watch something go across the sky.
Now,
Wow.
how old were you when this story finally came out?
Which story?
You had this experience when you were 3 years old. When did it really just
Like,
come out in the
when did
family
you
of
share it
surface?
with everyone?
Or
what do
maybe
you
a better
remember?
question would be, when did you start to recall these
Yeah.
things?
Right.
I mean, I don't think I thought it was out of the ordinary until I hit about school age. And then,
So you had this recall right from age 3 on.
Yes,
You didn't go
it-
10 years and then have this flashback
right.
that we had talked about before, that some people go a length of time and then they start to get like a short movie and it says, wow, what was that? What was that? Now they start to say, oh my God, I'm seeing something. You didn't experience that. You really had that whole recall all the way through.
Yeah, not of the whole event, but at least the
least the
onset
most,
of it,
yeah.
yes.
What I find interesting
That's
is when
cool.
we talk about children and things like that, I think when we are children, we are very much imagination and fantasy based, and
Right.
sometimes it's hard for us to decipher between what's reality and what's real. And I'm only taking it from my own advantage of being able to see people who are crossed over when I was at the age of 2, but thinking everyone else can see them. So did you ever think about that maybe this experience has happened to other people, and you know what I mean, and now it just happened to you? Or did you ever feel that way, or did you truly feel singled out, like that you were the only one to experience it? Because I thought that, like, everyone, when I had a lot of spirits in the house, and my mom could see them, my sister, my brother could see them, and they couldn't.
There was always a feeling of don't talk about it. I think a lot of it always not necessarily came from the human side of it.
Right,
It was
right,
both sides of
right.
it. So
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
interesting.
really think
yeah.
I ever put much thought into was it anybody else. It was
Right.
just kind of stay low and slide through.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's such an honest answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And the other side of it too is when it's that's how you know it's real. I'm only saying, and it's true, because it was something that you said, okay, I'm not sure if I should say this, because you knew you definitely had that experience. And as a child, I wasn't sure what the heck was going on. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so that's great. That's great though.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
As a social worker, Chuck, what's the impact on people as they get older? I think, Debbie, you hit right on a great point. When you're a child and this happens to you, mom and dad usually says, oh, that's nothing.
Right.
No, so we're very conditioned from childhood on, no such thing as ghosts.
Right.
A woman can't join the military,
Right.
those type of things. And yet, as you get older, you change, and you change with environment. I
Right,
get that.
right.
But what happens
And
to somebody that
knowledge.
was abducted very young and then 10 years later realizes this has happened to them?
Right.
So a lot of the people that we're working with
And
ourselves
supporting,
and
yeah.
supporting, a lot of their stories aren't what you might read about, say, in a book from Bud Hopkins, like Intruders.
Right.
A lot of the books that came out late 80s, early 90s, through the 90s, you look at a lot of Bud Hopkins books, Intruders. These are some books that sort of created a conversation around abduction. Abduction is something that happens. You notice things are off. You have missing time. You figure it out.
Right,
Barney
right.
and Betty Hill, 1961.
Sure.
Driving through the White Mountains with Jefferson, New Hampshire.
Yes.
And on their way back from a vacation, and they live in Portsmouth, and this whole thing happens, and this time goes missing, and they arrive much later than they were supposed to, and they don't really know what happened. So you go back to 1961, that was the first case, and I know Mike touched on this, but I can't say enough how proud I am of him. He was one of the instrumental forces in getting a marker in Jefferson put up, along with the help of Kathleen Marden, who was Betty Hill's niece.
Yes, I know her. Yeah.
Jackson, thank you.
Yeah, I know her.
But that was the first. Lincoln. Boy, we're really off tonight. We're not even hitting the
Lincoln's
right
where the
area.
markers, Jackson's where we do the.
Right.
Okay.
Wow.
So that was the first time that you see this narrative, and here's what happens, and they go in regression, and there was a lot of that. A lot of what Bud Hopkins was doing was regression for people that claim to have had these experiences. What we're finding with a lot of the people that come in, and what's interesting is, and John Mack is another person who passed away in 2004, Harvard professor, was scoffed at by his own academics because he started believing and feeling there was credibility to this abduction scenario. So many people that were logical people were telling him. We've had people come in that have worked with Bud Hopkins to our meetup groups and sit there and say, my name has been changed, but my example, and is that I can remember other lives where I was this specific being, and here's what I was in charge, and I'm here in this life to literally experience blank, blank, and blank in this
Right.
life. This is the outline of my life,
Yes.
and here's what my purpose is in this life. And I can have memory. And some of these people claim to have really interesting things that they can do at times. One story is this other person that came literally healed this issue, this medical health issue that they couldn't figure out, the doctors, by her intent alone.
Really?
And, so we hear
Let me
this.
backtrack. This wasn't just a medical issue. It was diagnosed as fatal,
Wow.
terminal.
Really?
Wow.
We've had some interesting people come through, and our job is not to investigate these people's stories.
Right, right.
There's a
It's to
big difference
listen.
here. It's to listen and it's to support. And I gotta, a lot of people might be hearing this on public TV, and what they're gonna say is, "Wow, these people are all crackpots." That's somebody's opinion. But let me be clear with you. I've worked with people that have psychotic disorders.
Right, and that's why I said in
For
your
over
field of
14
social
years.
work, right? So that has to go in there somewhere in terms of listening and supporting and trying to find
Right.
ways to understand.
I've only had one person. Let me just finish.
Yeah.
I've only had one person ever come in that I thought had a psychiatric disorder, and we still supported them, but we kept them at arm's length to some extent.
Right, right.
And that was a different type of support. So let me be clear: a lot of the people that are coming in have these stories that, to the average person, is going to sound absolutely crazy.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it's not real. It just means it's not real
Right.
for certain people because they cannot understand the context.
Right.
For our viewing audience, can you give us a place that, an email address, website they could reach you at?
Yeah, you can always find us at www.seacoastsaucers.com, or just look up Seacoast Saucers on Facebook. That's
Oh,
usually
great. Okay.
right up to date with everything we're doing. And
Oh, great.
And just for a point of clarity, you don't charge for this support.
no, and I mean, our monthly groups are all group settings. We know that's not for everybody. If you want it more one-on-one, just contact us and we'll set
Right.
something up.
Yeah.
So would it be okay for them to message you through Facebook, or
Yeah,
I'm
and
sure you guys
and
have
our
email address 'cause we use
emails
that
on
as
the
well.
websites and
Right,
stuff. But
right.
yeah,
How are you with confidentiality? If someone ever wanted confidentiality but still wanted to seek the support, so how would that happen? Because like what I do for work, I'm very confidential with everything that I do. So like, how is that with
yeah.
you two?
You don't want anybody to know you ever saw us. You never saw us.
Right, right. Oh,
We
wow.
don't use names, especially like on a show like
Right,
this. We wouldn't
right.
use any names. When there's a story, we leave just enough information so people aren't going to have that. And if somebody says, "Look, we really don't want you to use my information," that's
Right,
absolutely fine. It's a public setting that we're in, and if somebody needs something more private, please, again,
Yes.
reach out to us, seacoastsaucers.com.
And what can they do for your lecture? You mentioned early on that you were preparing a lecture or doing something about that. How can they find information on that if they wanted to?
So we're
attend
actually going to be, we're developing a number of different lectures. Mike is doing his on the abduction scenario, I believe. Mine is specifically on the social conditioning here in America, and
Wow.
trying to take a look at a number of the things that I've already talked about, which is why we don't have these conversations and what led up to that.
Yeah, when you go back to the Betty and Barney Hill
Yeah.
episode, which is probably the most famous, it still is today, but when you think about what they had to deal with from a social situation, first of all, they were an interracial marriage to begin with.
Right.
And back then, that was a real problem for a lot of people.
Yep.
And yet they had to come out and say something so controversial. And the material that I've read on it, it was amazing how the government kept trying to debunk their stories. They did a lot to, they put them under sodium pentothal. They did a lot of these
That's
type of things
right.
to look for flaws in the story, and they really could never break the story. And
Right.
the interesting thing is, you can talk on this, Chuck.
Sure.
They never made a nickel from any of that. I mean, they didn't write a book. They didn't sell their story to CBS.
Right.
Nothing. And to me, it's that social thing that they had to go through. Must have been really hard on them to put up with what was going on in the 50s and 60s,
Right.
and then also be ridiculed
Right.
for telling a true story.
Right,
It turns
going-
out that the government admitted they could not debunk their story. It just couldn't be done.
There's one part to the Barney and Betty Hill story that I think a lot of people that don't want to believe this don't want to listen to. And the one story I like the most, if I could share it,
Sure.
is just so Barney and Betty Hill claim to have had this missing time. They go to meet a renowned psychiatrist,
Yeah, I thought
Benjamin
they did.
Simon.
Yeah.
Simon,
Yes, I'm,
down near Boston, and he does over quite some time these, these hypnosis sessions with him. They start to realize all this stuff that had been going on. They start to try to deal with it, and through the hypnosis sessions, she recalls talking to what was the leader. The leader was this non-human entity that was having conversations with her in broken English, and she asked the question, "Where are you from?" And she says, they pulled out a star map and they showed me these stars in very specific alignments. And then when she got out, she drew the star map. So here's what I would like people to remember about this story. If there's one thing you remember, anybody can debate whether or not this is real or it's just, it's a bunch of hoopla and they remember what they want under hypnosis, right? Well, explain how it is that when she drew the star map, all but I think 3 stars in the middle 60s were on that star map lined up because there was a stay-at-home mom somewhere in the mid-U.S., last name Fish, Marjorie Fish or something along that. Marjorie Fish decided that she would take fishing line and beads, and she would make a 3-dimensional map of the star system and see if she could match it up with the star maps that were current for that time in the 60s. And what happened was she was able to match up all but 3. And she couldn't figure out why. She said, wow, this is really close. This is almost it. About a year or 2 went by after she figured this out, and the new star maps got updated. And guess what 3 stars were on the new star maps that were discovered?
Wow.
With those 3 in the exact location.
Right.
Now, this is not science fiction. This is fact.
Exactly, like you can't,
fact.
right.
Yeah,
So-
it is an amazing story. What surprises me a little bit, we haven't heard other stories like that. Because Betty and Bonnie Hill, they broke the mold. I mean, they came out and did it, and they took all the heat and everything else. And yet, you would think over the years we would have heard more stories in depth like that, and you haven't. So
We've got one that's really in depth.
Well, the Exeter story is quite a story.
You want to talk about Travis Walton just a little bit?
I didn't think that's where you're going with it. So, I thought you were going to go Stan Romanak.
That's a good one too. But
Very documented case.
Yeah.
Travis Walton, everybody's heard of Fire in the Sky.
Yeah.
What you don't understand is you can watch the movie, and a lot of it is factual in terms of they were looking for this guy. They gave polygraph tests to everybody that he was working with in this crew, sometimes multiple polygraphs. There's a really good documentary that just came out this last year in 2015 in which we saw Travis again last year at a festival that we were at, and it's really, really on the mark with the true story, not the Hollywood story. And one thing that's different that people don't understand is his experience on that ship. But just backtracking real quick, everybody was out looking for him. He didn't come to until about 3 days after. He was absolutely naked in next town
That's
over.
right.
That's
right.
He medically, when they looked at him medically, they had seen signs that you would see in somebody that had not eaten or drank in 3 days.
Right.
Everybody had passed a polygraph. This is one of the most well-documented. The documentation on this and the actual evidence really paints a picture of this whole crew. He went missing. We don't know what happened yet. He claims, and everybody in this saw this UFO that
Right.
struck him with lightning,
That's true.
and they sped off, scared for their lives. They went right back for him, and he was gone, and the ship was gone. So we look at this case. One thing that a lot of people don't also know is he had an experience in that ship where he did remember things. And if you ever, for those people that have actually read the book, can tell you when he came to, there were these little dark-eyed beings around
Yes.
him. And he got scared, and he started looking like he wanted to strike one. It was fight or flight for him. And he got out of there very quickly, and he got to this room where he could see almost like outer space. And
Wow.
he was in this room, and he played around with the control. It looked like it was shifting things. And then these 2 human-looking, blonde-haired people, I believe, came in, and he thought that they were humans ready to get him out of there. So he started to walk with them. He remembers going into almost like a hangar of sorts. And when he came to, after they put a mask over his face, he was naked in the next town.
Next time
Right,
over, yeah.
right.
It was a
I
very
remember
documented
that.
story.
Yes.
So we want to talk about proof. I think it's really important. There's going to be a lot of people that hear this and say, these guys are all crazy. you have to really look at the information. If you're
Yeah.
going to really be interested in this, or you really have an opinion, do some research on some of the most well-documented cases and
That's
how
right.
that stuff happens.
Yes.
You know, we say this in a lot of our presentations, is that, don't stand there and listen to me tell you. You know, I was saying earlier, Deb, that
Yeah.
we tell the people at the library, come to find out about Paranormal 101. You're
Right.
not going to change your thinking when you leave here, because there's nothing we're going to give you that's a wow moment.
Right.
But go do that research. Go, and not enough people do that. I mean,
know.
there are people sitting right here in this audience tonight that has had an encounter. I'll guarantee that.
It's
I will
true.
guarantee it's there. And they have to go and they have to say, okay, let me research this. Let me find out. Let me go with like minds so I can talk about it.
Can I
And
say
that's
something about that?
the biggest thing?
I just want to encourage anybody that has ever had an encounter, has seen anything, please go to our website. It's seacoastsaucers.com. It's that easy.
Great.
We have contact information. We hold 3 meetups every single month. It costs nothing. We have a donation process
Right.
just so we can keep the lights on at the KRI
Right.
Center where
Yeah.
we hold it.
Yep.
It is very important, and why we started this organization, one of the number one reasons, and our motto is, you are not alone. And that's not by chance that we have that motto. The reason that we believe that this needs to be talked about is because we have gotten to a point where we don't need anybody to tell us that we're crazy for seeing something.
Right.
We police each other, and that's not okay.
Right.
It's not okay that the biggest story of our time is being overlooked by people because of all of this social conditioning.
Right,
Right.
We
right.
need to be able to have these conversations, and we're very pleased that both of you are holding shows like this
Mm-hmm.
and bringing that information for people, because when people start to see that there are actually grounded people having these conversations that they didn't think anybody could have,
Right,
we're going to tip
right.
the scale in society so
Right.
that people can actually talk about what's really going on.
Yes.
And unfortunately, too many people go 9 to 5 jobs every day, wake up, go to work, go to school, and when they have experiences, it doesn't fit into their reality. And they don't know what to do with it. We need to start having these conversations because reality is not what we think it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, of all the years I've been in paranormal, I've never told anybody this, so this is groundbreaking news tonight. Not a month ago, my daughter and I were coming out of Salem, and we were coming up Route 111. And my daughter said to me, "Dad, what is that?" And I looked out the window, and there was these 4 very distinctive green lights.
Really?
But maybe, 100 feet, 200 feet up,
Yeah.
And it wasn't an aircraft. I pulled over, the guy behind me pulled over. And we sat there and watched this for maybe, now people are going to say, well, that's not a long time, probably 3 to 5 minutes.
Right, that was us in 101.
It's like a lifetime.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
you do this. And I've never had an encounter or an experience before. And we watched this craft just hover there.
Right.
Now, I'll tell you what I first said was, it's a drone. I said to
Right.
my daughter, it's got to be a drone.
Most logical explanation.
But it was so far out on Route 111 that I thought, wow, if this is a drone, the operator has to be pretty far away from this thing, because it just sat there. And it had 4 green lights, and it was almost impossible, Mike, to tell how big it was. But, my daughter said, that thing's enormous.
I want
And
to
said
bring
to
up
her,
another point too, real quick,
Yeah,
on your
go ahead.
story. You've been doing the paranormal for
10 years.
Yeah.
So this we had a similar situation where we went on an expedition to call these things in, and it worked. And
Right.
everybody's like, "Well, where's the videos? Did you even after all your training and I
And
got to catch something on camera? Did you
iPhones, I know.
pull? Even think to? No, you just sit there.
We
off
both had
drop.
smartphones.
Right, it's true.
But I'll tell you a quick story off this. We were doing an investigation in Kingston in a restaurant. And like I said, I've been doing this 10 years.
Yes.
We were standing up on the 2nd floor, and then there was another small stepway up to a little flat spot. 2 of us are standing there. We turn to leave, and there's a full-body apparition standing right in front of us. Right in front of us. And we both just stood there. And again, doesn't seem like a long time, but when you see that, it's a lifetime. So
Right.
it might have been 10 seconds or 15 seconds.
Right.
Well, when I tell this story, people always say to me, "Did you get a picture of it?"
It's so true.
And I always say to them, "A picture? I was so scared I couldn't run. I didn't want to take a picture, I wanted to run." So when people say, "Well, how come there isn't more pictures of saucers? How come there's not more pictures of ghosts?" I say to them, because people don't always carry a camera around.
Right.
I think we'll see that changing with technology, with cam in the
Right,
cars now.
yeah.
So that technology will change. But don't look at proof and evidence based on there's no pictures.
Yeah.
That's not what this should be
And
about.
I think we know even when there are pictures, people still have issues
It
with
Of course,
It is,
of
and that's
course.
why I say experience tops it all. When
Yeah.
people start having their own experiences and can't explain it, that's when they sometimes can go and look for
Absolutely.
people like us or people like them to have those experiences. And to bring up the libraries again, because we love going to libraries and giving lectures there, we always have a full house. There's never an empty seat, and sometimes they turn people away. They are thirsty for information.
Right. True
And-
information.
And you get that, you'll get the
Right.
cynics, of course, but we want them. We want
Right.
them to go. And they ask questions and everything. They really do, you know?
Listen, we can't thank you guys enough for coming on. I just think
Yes.
that the first show was such a success because of you two. I'll
Yes.
tell you, it was great. We really
It
enjoyed
was.
it. Would like to have you come back.
Yes,
I'd love to.
absolutely.
Because I guess there's still at least another hour or two.
Oh,
we'd like to
more than
talk to
likely.
Yes.
Can I just make a real quick
You sure
point?
can.
Absolutely.
You don't need to have some grand Hollywood type story. If you
Right.
just even see something, report it. It's worth it because it might have just been a light in the sky to you, but it might have been an encounter for somebody else, and having that collaborating
Yes.
Sure.
story will really help them out.
Right,
And you
that's
know, we
true.
have to encourage our viewers to get in touch with you guys if they've had any kind of encounter, or if they just have a lot of interest in this. I think that this is the time to start, as you said earlier, Chuck, the conversation about it.
Right.
And bring it to a level like we did here of intelligence, you know?
Right.
The movies, and we've seen it in the paranormal, we've certainly seen it in UFO movies, they go way beyond, and people have to understand that that's for entertainment purposes.
Right. Right.
90% of it's not real.
Right.
The real conversations have to take place like this.
At small
Well,
tables
great.
like
if,
this.
if you can't make it to
absolutely.
us, just
Yeah.
have these conversations with people around you.
That's what
Everybody
I
might
mean,
laugh
yes.
Yep.
and walk off. I guarantee you somebody will walk back up
That's
and
right.
nobody's looking and
That's
go,
right.
hey, just so you know.
Sure.
You're
Yes.
not alone.
And lastly, because I know we have to tie this up soon, I want to be sure that everyone understands that when we say we encourage them, they can contact them positively only. I don't
Right.
recommend people, emailing and messaging negative responses and cynicism and things like. We're not wasting our time with that. So we're not wasting our time with the show with it, and I don't want anyone wasting your
We've
time
actually never
with
had that
those
happen.
comments.
Yeah.
We've
So-
never had a negative comment.
which is,
Yeah.
that's great, and I just want to protect you because
Right.
they took the time to see us today.
That's correct.
And I really don't want them to get anything negative from
And
anyone.
the real truth
you know?
wrapping this show up is that we're all interested in one thing, and that's finding the truth.
Yes.
And I always say, you know what, the truth is out there, and wherever it takes us. If we find out someday that ghosts and spirits and energy doesn't exist, that's okay with me. That really is okay with me if we
Yes.
find the truth. I believe, like you believe, that it's out there, and we're going to, someday, we're going to make proof of this. We're going to be able to come out and say, here it is. I always say in my presentations, right, Deb, I can't prove ghosts exist unless George
Right.
Washington walks into the room with
It's
me.
so true.
Then I get you, but other than that. So thanks for coming on, guys. I hope
Thanks,
I
I
know,
everybody.
thank
have you on again sometime.
It was great. It was
Nice
nice
meeting you.
getting to meet you guys, and we're going to have you again because
Right.
I really would like to.
So
do
next
that.
week on the Paranormal and Beyond, we shift gears a little bit. We're going to go to a ghost hunting group. They promised to bring some evidence with them, and so it should be interesting. So we look forward to
Great.
next week on the Paranormal and Beyond. Thanks
Yes.
again for coming on,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.